The autumn rain painted Seattle in shades of silver and gray as Natalie Brooks pushed through the revolving doors of Metropolitan General Hospital. Her scrubs were slightly damp from the dash across the parking lot, but her smile remained bright as she greeted the security guard with her usual warmth. At 26, Natalie had already earned a reputation as one of the most dedicated nurses in the intensive care unit, the kind of person who stayed late without being asked and remembered every patient's favorite song or comfort food. The ICU hummed with its familiar symphony of beeping monitors and hushed conversations as Natalie stored her bag in her locker. She pulled her chestnut hair into a practical ponytail, catching her reflection in the small mirror. Tired hazel eyes looked back at her, evidence of another late night studying for her pediatric nursing certification. The dream of working with children had burned in her heart since she was a teenager volunteering at summer camps, but the path felt impossibly long sometimes. "Morning, Natalie," Grace Kim called out, her best friend and fellow nurse appearing with 2 steaming cups of coffee. Grace was everything Natalie wasn't: bold, outspoken, with jet black hair she wore in a pixie cut that perfectly framed her angular features. "You look like you need this more than I do." Natalie accepted the cup gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. "You're a lifesaver. I was up until 2 studying cardiac protocols." "That certification is going to be yours," Grace assured her, bumping her shoulder affectionately. "Oh, and speaking of things that are yours, this was tucked into your locker slot." Grace handed her a cream-colored envelope, thick paper that felt expensive between Natalie's fingers. Her name was written across the front in elegant script, each letter formed with careful precision. Frowning slightly, Natalie opened it to find a note card inside. "In the quiet hours before dawn, when the hospital sleeps and only the dedicated remain, there is one soul whose light never dims. Your compassion is not just a skill but a gift that transforms every life you touch. The world is brighter because you exist." Natalie's breath caught in her throat. The words were beautiful, intimate in a way that made her heart flutter uncomfortably. There was no signature, only that careful, mysterious handwriting. "Well?" Grace leaned over her shoulder, reading quickly. "Oh my God, Natalie. You have a secret admirer." "Don't be ridiculous," Natalie whispered, though her cheeks flushed pink. "It's probably just someone being kind." "Kind people send thank you cards, not poetry," Grace countered, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "This is someone who's been watching you, really seeing you." Before Natalie could respond, the shift supervisor called them to the morning briefing. She tucked the note carefully into her pocket, trying to ignore how it seemed to burn against her hip throughout the entire meeting. The morning passed in its usual blur of medication rounds, vital sign checks, and patient care. Natalie was changing the dressing on Mr. Patterson's surgical wound when she heard a commotion in the hallway. The energy in the ICU shifted immediately, everyone straightening their posture and checking their appearance. That could only mean one thing. Julian Ashford was making his rounds. Natalie had only seen the hospital's CEO from a distance in her 8 months working at Metropolitan General. He was a figure of intimidating authority, known for his cold efficiency and exacting standards. At 34, he had transformed his family's struggling hospital into one of the premier medical facilities on the West Coast, but the achievement had come with a reputation for being utterly ruthless in business dealings. She finished securing Mr. Patterson's bandage and stepped into the hallway just as Julian passed. He was taller than she expected, easily over 6 feet, with dark hair styled perfectly despite the early hour. His suit probably cost more than her monthly rent, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes that emphasized his athletic build. But it was his eyes that stopped her, steel blue and piercing, the kind that seemed to see through pretense directly to truth. Their gazes met for a fraction of a second. Natalie felt something electric pass between them, a recognition she couldn't name. Then his attention moved on, continuing his inspection with the hospital administrator scurrying beside him, and she was left wondering if she had imagined the entire moment. "Did you see that?" Grace materialized at her elbow, keeping her voice low. "Julian Ashford just looked at you." "He looked past me," Natalie corrected, trying to slow her suddenly racing heart. "He was inspecting the unit." "Sure," Grace said with a knowing smirk. "Whatever helps you sleep at night." The notes continued to appear with startling regularity over the following weeks, each one more intimate than the last. Natalie found them tucked into patient charts she was reviewing, slipped between the pages of medical journals in the break room, even once folded inside her takeout order from the hospital cafeteria. Whoever her mysterious admirer was, they had access to every corner of her life within Metropolitan General's walls. Your laughter in the supply room this morning reminded me that joy can exist even in places built for pain. You transform sterile hallways into gardens simply by walking through them. I wonder if you know how many lives you've changed without ever realizing it. Natalie kept every note in a wooden box her aunt had given her for her 16th birthday. At night, alone in her apartment, she would read them by lamplight, trying to decipher clues about the author's identity. The handwriting was educated, confident. The vocabulary suggested someone well-read, possibly older than her. And the observations were so specific, so detailed, that the writer had to be someone who saw her regularly. Grace had her own theories, of course. It's definitely Dr. Marcus Chen from cardiology, she insisted one afternoon while they restocked medication carts. He's always asking about you. Dr. Chen is married with 3 kids, Natalie laughed. And he asks about everyone. That's just his personality. Fine. What about Trevor from radiology? He turns bright red every time you walk past. Natalie shook her head, smiling. Trevor is 22 and plays video games in the basement during his lunch break. These notes are written by someone with more life experience. What she didn't say, what she barely admitted to herself, was that sometimes she caught herself watching Julian Ashford during his increasingly frequent visits to the ICU. There was something in the way he observed the unit, his gaze lingering on her station just a fraction longer than necessary. Once, she had turned quickly and found him staring directly at her, an expression of such raw longing on his face that it stole her breath. Then his professional mask had slammed back into place, and he had continued his rounds as if nothing had happened. It was impossible, of course. Men like Julian Ashford didn't fall for ordinary nurses. They dated supermodels and socialites, women who understood charity galas and investment portfolios. Still, Natalie couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, impossibly, their fates were becoming intertwined. The hospital's annual fundraising gala arrived on a crisp October evening. Natalie hadn't planned to attend until Grace practically dragged her to a consignment shop, insisting she needed to get out of scrubs for one night. They found a dress in deep emerald green that hugged Natalie's curves before flowing to the floor, elegant without being ostentatious. You look like a princess, Grace declared, helping her pin up her hair into an intricate updo. Tonight, your mysterious admirer won't be able to resist revealing himself. Natalie's stomach fluttered with nervous anticipation as they entered the hotel ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across hundreds of guests in formal attire. She recognized doctors and administrators, board members and wealthy donors, all mingling in a world far removed from the fluorescent-lit hallways where she spent her days. Champagne? A server appeared with a tray. Natalie accepted a glass, taking a small sip of the bubbling liquid. Across the room, she spotted Julian Ashford surrounded by admirers. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin, emphasizing his broad shoulders and lean waist. A beautiful blonde woman clung to his arm, laughing at something he said while gazing up at him with obvious adoration. "That's Cassandra Whitmore," Grace whispered, following Natalie's gaze. "Her father is on the hospital board. Rumor has it their families have been planning a merger for years, business and personal." Something cold settled in Natalie's chest. Of course Julian Ashford had someone like Cassandra Whitmore. Of course he belonged to a world where marriages were strategic alliances rather than love matches. She took another sip of champagne, trying to ignore the sharp disappointment cutting through her. Natalie Brooks? She turned to find Julian standing directly behind her, having somehow crossed the crowded ballroom without her noticing. Up close, he was even more devastating, his steel blue eyes intense in the golden light. "Mr. Ashford," she managed, proud that her voice remained steady. "Julian, please." His gaze traveled over her dress, something flickering in his expression before he controlled it. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight. I'm glad you came." Grace convinced me it would be good for staff morale, Natalie said, acutely aware that Cassandra Whitmore was watching them with narrowed eyes from across the room. Would you dance with me? The question came abruptly, almost desperately. Natalie's heart hammered against her ribs. I don't think that's appropriate, Mr. Ashford. Your date might object. Cassandra is not my date. She's a family friend. Julian extended his hand, and despite every logical reason to refuse, Natalie found herself placing her fingers in his palm. The moment he pulled her onto the dance floor, everything else faded. His hand settled at the small of her back, warm even through the fabric of her dress, while his other hand engulfed hers completely. They moved together with unexpected ease, as if they had been dancing together for years rather than seconds. You're very good at this, Natalie murmured, focusing on his shoulder rather than meeting those penetrating eyes. My mother insisted on ballroom lessons, Julian replied, his voice closer to her ear than strictly necessary. I hated every minute of them until approximately 30 seconds ago. Heat flooded Natalie's cheeks. You shouldn't say things like that. Why not? Because you're the CEO, and I'm just a nurse. Because you have someone like Cassandra Whitmore waiting for you. Because this whole thing is completely inappropriate. Julian's hand tightened fractionally on her back. What if I told you that Cassandra Whitmore means nothing to me? That my family's expectations are a cage I've been trying to escape for years? That there's only one woman in this entire ballroom I want to be dancing with, and I'm currently holding her in my arms? Natalie's breath caught. She finally looked up, finding his face closer than expected, his expression stripped of its usual cold authority. In its place was something vulnerable and raw, an emotion so intense it terrified her. You don't mean that, she whispered. I've never meant anything more in my life. His thumb traced a small circle against her back, sending shivers down her spine. Natalie, I need to tell you something. I should have told you weeks ago, but I was afraid. The music swelled around them, the moment stretching taut with possibility. Natalie's mind raced, connecting dots she had been afraid to connect. The notes. The lingering glances. The way he always seemed to know exactly what she needed to hear. Could it be possible? Julian, are you? There you are. Cassandra's sharp voice cut through the music like a knife. She appeared beside them, her smile brittle and cold. Julian, darling, your father is looking for you. Something about the board announcement? Julian's expression shuddered immediately, the vulnerable man disappearing behind his CEO mask. Of course. Excuse me, Natalie. He released her and walked away, leaving Natalie standing alone on the dance floor with her heart pounding and questions burning through her mind. Cassandra shot her a triumphant look before following Julian into the crowd. Grace materialized with another glass of champagne. Okay, what just happened? You two looked like you were about to kiss in front of 500 people. I don't know, Natalie admitted, accepting the drink with shaking hands. Grace, I think Julian might be the one writing the notes. The CEO? Grace's eyes widened. Natalie, that's crazy. Although it would explain why they're so well written and why the person has access to everywhere you go. But why would Julian Ashford be interested in you? Not that you're not amazing, she added quickly, but you're from completely different worlds. I know. That's what makes this so impossible. They stayed another hour before Natalie's head began to ache from the noise and champagne. Grace offered to drive her home, but Natalie insisted on taking a cab, wanting time alone with her tumultuous thoughts. The hospital parking garage was nearly empty when she stopped to retrieve her phone from her locker. The evening shift had started hours ago, and the building held that peculiar late-night quiet she normally found comforting. Tonight, it felt eerie. She was walking toward the exit when she heard raised voices echoing from the stairwell. One was Julian's, tight with controlled anger. The other belonged to an older man, cultured and commanding. You will marry Cassandra, Julian. The merger depends on it. I won't marry someone I don't love to satisfy a business arrangement. Love? The older man laughed bitterly. You sound like a child. This is about legacy, about building something that lasts. The Ashford and Whitmore families together will control healthcare across the entire Pacific Northwest. I don't care about controlling healthcare. I care about actually practicing medicine, about helping people instead of treating them like profit margins. You gave up the right to practice medicine when you killed that boy on your operating table. The words fell like stones into silence. Natalie pressed herself against the wall, knowing she shouldn't be hearing this but unable to move. That was an accident. Julian's voice was hoarse with old pain. I did everything right. The embolism was unpredictable. And yet the boy still died. You made your choice then, Julian. You walked away from surgery and took on the responsibility of leadership. Don't throw that away now for some infatuation with a nurse who can never be part of our world. Natalie's blood turned to ice. They were talking about her. Natalie Brooks is worth 10 of Cassandra Whitmore, Julian said fiercely. She's worth 100 board mergers and 1,000 strategic alliances. She makes me want to be the man I was before that surgery, before I let fear turn me into someone I don't recognize. Then you're a fool. The board announces your engagement to Cassandra next week. I suggest you prepare yourself. Footsteps echoed in the stairwell, coming closer. Natalie fled toward the exit, her heels clicking against the concrete as tears blurred her vision. She burst into the rain-soaked night, gasping for air that suddenly felt too thick to breathe. Julian loved her. Julian was being forced to marry someone else. Julian had lost a patient and abandoned surgery because of it. The revelation spun through her mind in a dizzying spiral. She made it home somehow, stumbling into her apartment and collapsing onto her couch still wearing the emerald dress. Her phone buzzed with a text from Grace checking if she got home safely, but Natalie couldn't find the energy to respond. Instead, she opened the wooden box and spread the notes across her coffee table, reading them with new understanding. Each one was a confession Julian could never make to her face, a bridge built from words because the distance between their worlds seemed too vast to cross any other way. How does one thank an angel for simply being what she is? Natalie pressed the note to her lips, tasting salt from her tears. Tomorrow she would have to face Julian at the hospital, would have to pretend she hadn't overheard his father's ultimatum. Tomorrow she would have to watch him marry Cassandra Whitmore to save his family's empire. But tonight, alone in the darkness with only his words for company, Natalie Brooks let herself imagine a different world. One where love mattered more than legacy, where a nurse and a CEO could dance without the weight of expectation crushing them, where two hearts could find each other despite every obstacle society placed between them. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Grace but an unknown number. The message contained only 4 words, but they shattered and rebuilt her heart simultaneously. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Natalie stared at the screen until her vision blurred. Then she typed a response with trembling fingers. Meet me. The answer came immediately. Pediatric ward. Midnight. Come alone. Natalie stood outside the pediatric ward at 11:58, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The hospital's night shift hummed quietly around her, but this wing was particularly peaceful, most of the young patients already asleep. She had changed back into jeans and a sweater, her formal dress abandoned on her bedroom floor in her rush to return. The lights were dimmed in the hallway, creating pools of shadow between the small circles of illumination. Natalie wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly uncertain. What was she doing here? What could possibly come from this meeting except more heartbreak? The clock on the wall ticked to midnight. You came. Julian's voice emerged from the shadows near the nurse's station. He stepped into the light, and Natalie's breath caught. He had changed too, wearing dark jeans and a simple black sweater that made him look younger, more vulnerable. His hair was disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it repeatedly. You asked me to, Natalie said, proud that her voice remained steady despite her racing pulse. Julian moved closer, stopping just outside her personal space. I wasn't sure you would. After what you must have overheard in the stairwell, I thought you might never want to see me again. So you knew I was there. I sensed you. I always sense you when you're near. He smiled sadly. It's like my entire body becomes attuned to your presence, every nerve ending aware of exactly where you are in any room. Natalie's hands trembled. Julian, we shouldn't be doing this. Your father said the engagement announcement is next week. My father can announce whatever he wants. I'm not marrying Cassandra Whitmore. Julian stepped closer, close enough that Natalie could smell his cologne, something woodsy and expensive that made her head spin. I can't marry her when I'm completely in love with someone else. The words hung in the air between them, devastating in their honesty. Natalie whispered, even as her heart soared. Don't say things like that when you know we can't be together. You have responsibilities, family expectations, a whole empire depending on you. And what about what I need? What about the fact that I haven't felt truly alive in 5 years until I watched you read poetry to Mrs. Chen? Julian's hand lifted, hovering near her cheek but not quite touching. Natalie, I need to tell you everything. I need you to understand why I've been writing those notes instead of just talking to you like a normal person. I know about the surgery, Natalie said softly. I know you lost a patient and left practice. Julian's hand dropped. Then you know I'm a coward. I let one tragedy destroy my entire career, my calling. I was a surgeon, Natalie. A good one. But when that 12-year-old boy died on my table despite everything I did right, something broke inside me. I couldn't trust myself anymore, couldn't risk holding another life in my hands. So you became the CEO instead. I became a shell. I built walls around myself so high that I couldn't feel anything anymore, not pain but not joy either. I convinced myself that was safer, that if I just focused on business and strategy and profit margins, I could forget what it felt like to care that deeply about anything. He laughed bitterly. Then you walked into my hospital, and every single wall I built came crashing down. Natalie felt tears burning in her eyes. When did you first notice me? 8 months ago. Your second week working here. You were in the cafeteria, and a little girl from the pediatric ward wandered down looking for her mother. You knelt down to her level, made her laugh, then walked her back upstairs even though you were on your lunch break. I watched you from across the room and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Why didn't you just talk to me? Because I'm Julian Ashford, the ice-cold CEO everyone fears. Because you deserve someone warm and kind, not someone who spent 5 years hiding from his own emotions. Because I was terrified that if I approached you directly, you would see right through me to the broken man underneath. He finally touched her, his fingers gentle against her jaw. The notes let me be honest in a way I couldn't be face to face. Through them, I could show you my real heart. Natalie leaned into his touch, her resolve crumbling. Your real heart is beautiful, Julian. Every word you wrote was beautiful. Natalie. Her name was a prayer on his lips. I know this is impossible. I know our worlds don't match, that my family will make your life hell, that choosing you means walking away from everything the Ashford name represents. But I can't keep pretending I don't love you. I can't marry Cassandra when you're the only woman I want to wake up next to for the rest of my life. Before Natalie could respond, before she could think through all the reasons why this was a terrible idea, Julian closed the distance between them and kissed her. The world tilted on its axis. His lips were soft against hers, gentle despite the desperate hunger she could feel thrumming through his body. Natalie's hands found his chest, feeling his heart racing as fast as her own. The kiss deepened, and she opened to him, tasting champagne and desire and 5 years of loneliness finally finding its end. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Julian pressed his forehead against hers. Tell me you feel this too. Tell me I'm not alone in this madness. You're not alone. Natalie's fingers curled into his sweater, holding him close. Julian, I've been falling in love with the man who wrote those notes for weeks. Finding out he's you just makes it more real and more terrifying. We can make this work, Julian insisted, his hands framing her face. I don't care what my family says or what the board thinks. I'll step down as CEO if I have to. I'll go back to medicine, start over from the beginning. You'd give up everything for me? Everything I have means nothing without you in it. Natalie wanted to believe him, wanted to sink into this perfect moment and ignore all the complications waiting beyond these walls. But reality was already creeping back in, cold and unforgiving. Julian, your father will destroy us both. You heard what he said about me, about nurses not being part of your world. Then we'll create a new world. Julian kissed her again, softer this time, achingly tender. A world where what matters is how much we love each other, not how much money we have or what last name we carry. A sharp cry cut through the quiet hallway, shattering their private moment. Both of them turned toward the sound, their medical training immediately overriding everything else. The cry came again, weak and pained, from one of the patient rooms. Natalie rushed toward the sound, Julian right behind her. Inside room 304, a small boy of about 7 was thrashing in his bed, his breathing labored and irregular. The monitors screamed warnings, numbers dropping into dangerous territory. That's Tommy Martinez, Natalie said, already moving to check his vitals. Congenital heart defect. He was stable when I checked on him earlier. Julian's face had gone pale, but he stepped forward instead of backing away. Looks like he's having a cardiac episode. We need to page the cardiologist immediately. Dr. Chen is in surgery with a trauma case. It'll be at least 20 minutes before anyone can get here. Natalie's voice was calm despite the panic clawing at her chest. Tommy's lips were turning blue, his small chest heaving with the effort to breathe. We don't have 20 minutes. Julian stared at the monitor, and Natalie could see the war raging behind his eyes. Fear battling with training, trauma confronting necessity. Julian. She touched his arm, grounding him in the present. I know you're scared, but this boy needs you. Not the CEO. The surgeon. I can't. Natalie, what if I make it worse? What if he dies like? Then he dies fighting instead of drowning alone. Natalie's voice was fierce. But he won't die, because you're the best surgeon this hospital ever had, and somewhere under all that fear is the man who became a doctor to save lives. Tommy's breathing became more erratic. There was no more time for doubt. Julian's expression shifted, something hardening in his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice carried absolute authority. Get me an emergency intubation kit and prepare epinephrine. We're doing this here. The next 15 minutes passed in a blur of controlled chaos. Natalie moved in perfect synchronization with Julian, anticipating his needs before he voiced them. She had never seen him in doctor mode before, had only known the cold CEO, but watching him work was like witnessing an artist create a masterpiece. His hands were completely steady as he stabilized Tommy's airway, his voice calm as he walked Natalie through each step. This was Julian Ashford as he was meant to be, confident and skilled and utterly focused on saving a life. Heart rate stabilizing, Natalie reported, watching the monitors with relief as Tommy's numbers began climbing back toward normal. Breathing is improving. Julian gently adjusted the tube, his touch infinitely careful on the small boy's face. He's going to make it. By the time Dr. Chen arrived, Tommy was stable and sleeping peacefully, the crisis averted. The cardiologist took one look at the setup and whistled low. Impressive work. Who managed this? Mr. Ashford did, Natalie said quietly, watching Julian's face. Dr. Chen's eyebrows shot up. I didn't know you still practiced, Julian. I don't. Julian was staring at Tommy, something shifting in his expression. Or I didn't. I'm not sure what I do anymore. After Dr. Chen took over Tommy's care, Julian and Natalie found themselves back in the empty hallway, the adrenaline slowly draining from their systems. You saved his life, Natalie said softly. We saved his life. Julian looked down at his hands as if seeing them for the first time in years. I didn't think I could do that anymore. I was so sure I had lost it, that one mistake had cost me everything I was meant to be. You never lost it. You just forgot how to trust yourself. Julian pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. You gave me that back. In one impossible moment, you gave me back everything I thought was gone forever. They stood there holding each other while the hospital moved around them, two people finding home in the most unlikely place. But their peace was short-lived. How touching. The cold voice made them spring apart. Cassandra Whitmore stood at the end of the hallway, her expression venomous. Behind her, looking equally furious, was Julian's father. Cassandra. Father. Julian stepped protectively in front of Natalie. What are you doing here? I called your father when you disappeared from the gala, Cassandra said, her smile sharp enough to cut. Imagine our surprise when hospital security mentioned seeing you enter the building with this woman. Julian's father looked at Natalie with undisguised contempt. So this is the nurse who thinks she can destroy everything our families have built. Tell me, Miss Brooks, do you have any idea how much money is tied up in the Ashford-Whitmore merger? How many people's livelihoods depend on this alliance? With all due respect, sir, Natalie said, finding her voice despite her trembling, people's livelihoods shouldn't depend on your son marrying someone he doesn't love. Love. The older man spat the word like a curse. What does a nurse from nowhere know about the responsibilities of wealth and power? You think love pays for medical research? Love funds hospital expansion? Love keeps thousands of people employed? No, Julian said quietly, his hand finding Natalie's. But love makes all of that worth doing in the first place. I've spent 5 years building your empire, father. 5 years putting profits over people, strategy over compassion. I'm done. You're done. His father's voice could have frozen lava. You don't get to be done, Julian. You have obligations. I have one obligation that matters more than all the others combined. Julian turned to face his father fully, shoulders squared. I have an obligation to be the man I was meant to be, not the person you need me to be for your business deals. If you walk away from this engagement, I'll destroy her. His father pointed at Natalie. I'll make sure she never works at another hospital in this country. I'll bury her in lawsuits and scandal until her name is worthless. Natalie felt ice slide down her spine, but Julian's hand tightened around hers. If you touch her, if you so much as breathe in her direction, I'll dismantle everything you've built. Julian's voice was soft but carried absolute conviction. I know where every financial skeleton is buried, father. I know about the kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies, the insurance fraud you've been covering up for years. I'll burn the Ashford empire to the ground before I let you hurt her. The silence that followed was deafening. You're bluffing, his father said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Try me. Cassandra laughed, a brittle sound. You'd throw away billions of dollars for her? A nobody nurse who'll never fit into our world? She's worth more than 1 billion worlds like yours, Julian said simply. And yes, I'd give up everything for her because she's the only thing that makes any of this matter. His father stared at him for a long moment, and Natalie could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Finally, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. You'll regret this, Julian. Mark my words. Cassandra lingered a moment longer, her beautiful face twisted with rage. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. No, Julian said, looking at Natalie with such love it made her chest ache. I'm finally correcting it. After they left, Natalie sagged against the wall, the adrenaline finally crashing. Julian, what have we done? Your father meant every word of those threats. Let him try. Julian cupped her face in his hands. Natalie, I need you to understand something. I've spent 5 years being the person everyone else needed me to be. The dutiful son. The ruthless CEO. The man who could turn off his emotions like a light switch. But with you, I remember who I actually am. A doctor. A man who cares. Someone who believes medicine should be about healing, not profit margins. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm stepping down as CEO. I'm going back to medicine, starting over as a resident if I have to. I'm building a life based on what I love instead of what's expected. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. And I'm doing it with you, if you'll have me. Natalie felt tears streaming down her face. You'd really give up everything? The money, the power, your family's approval? I already have everything I need right here. Julian kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. You are my everything, Natalie Brooks. You and the chance to be the man you make me want to become. I love you, Natalie whispered against his mouth. I love you so much it terrifies me. Then let's be terrified together. They kissed again, deeper this time, a promise and a beginning wrapped into one perfect moment. Around them, the hospital continued its eternal rhythm, but for Julian and Natalie, time had stopped, holding them suspended in a space where only love mattered. Natalie adjusted the small patient's foreline, her movements practiced and gentle. The pediatric ward at Seattle Children's Hospital was everything she had dreamed of: bright murals covering the walls, child-sized furniture painted in cheerful colors, and the constant sound of laughter mixing with the medical equipment's beeps. How's our little artist doing? A familiar voice asked from the doorway. Natalie turned to find Julian leaning against the frame, wearing scrubs instead of a suit, his hair slightly mussed from a long shift. He had spent the last 6 months completing an accelerated residency program in pediatric cardiology, working impossible hours to regain his medical license while also testifying against his father's fraudulent practices. The Ashford Empire had indeed burned, just as Julian had promised. But from its ashes, something better had emerged. Julian had used his inheritance to establish a non-profit children's hospital focused on providing care regardless of ability to pay. Natalie had joined him as the head pediatric nurse, finally achieving the dream she had worked toward for years. Emma just finished her masterpiece, Natalie said, gesturing to the 6-year-old girl who was proudly holding up a crayon drawing of 2 doctors holding hands. That's us, Emma announced. Dr. Julian and Nurse Natalie. You're getting married, right? Julian crossed the room and knelt beside Emma's bed. We are. In 2 weeks, actually. And we were hoping you might like to be our flower girl. Emma's eyes went wide. Really? Me? Really you, Natalie confirmed, reaching out to squeeze the girl's hand. If your doctors say you're well enough. I'll be well enough, Emma declared with the absolute certainty of childhood. I have to be. It's a princess job. After settling Emma back with her coloring books, Julian and Natalie stepped into the hallway. He immediately pulled her close, kissing her the way he did 100 times a day now, as if he still couldn't quite believe she was real. How was your board meeting? Natalie asked when they finally separated. Productive. We secured funding for another 20 beds in the cardiac unit. Julian's smile was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way it never had during his CEO days. And Dr. Chen asked if I'd be interested in co-authoring a paper on pediatric cardiac interventions. That's wonderful. Natalie rested her head against his chest, listening to his steady heartbeat. You're exactly where you're meant to be. We both are. It hadn't been easy. Julian's family had essentially disowned him, though his sister Sophia had reached out privately to express her support. The society pages had been brutal, calling Natalie a gold digger despite the fact that Julian had given up his fortune. Cassandra Whitmore had married a real estate developer 6 weeks after Julian's departure, already pregnant according to the tabloids. But none of it mattered. Not when Natalie woke up every morning next to the man she loved, both of them doing work that genuinely helped people. Not when Julian looked at her like she was his entire world. Not when they had built something real and meaningful from the ruins of expectations and obligations. I have something for you, Julian said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a familiar cream-colored envelope. Natalie's heart skipped. You still write them? Always. He handed her the note, watching as she opened it with the same careful reverence she had shown the very first one. My dearest Natalie, 6 months ago, you saved my life by teaching me how to live again. In 2 weeks, I get to promise you forever in front of everyone we love. But I want you to know that I already made that promise the night you found me in the darkness and showed me the way home. Every day with you is a gift I never expected to receive. Every moment loving you is a reminder that the best things in life are worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth risking everything to protect. You are my light, my heart, my reason for believing in second chances. Forever yours, Julian. Natalie pressed the note to her chest, tears blurring her vision. You're going to make me cry in the middle of my shift. Then let me give you something to smile about too. Julian took her hand, sliding a delicate ring onto her finger beside her engagement band. It was simple, elegant, with a single emerald the color of the dress she had worn to the gala. This is for being brave enough to love a broken man. For believing I could be more than my fears and failures. For choosing me when choosing me meant giving up your own security and peace. I'd choose you 1,000 times over, Natalie whispered. In every lifetime, in every version of our story, I'd always choose you. They kissed again, soft and sweet, a promise renewed with every touch. Around them, the pediatric ward buzzed with life, with hope, with the sound of children healing and families reuniting. And in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, Julian Ashford and Natalie Brooks held each other close, two souls who had found their way through darkness into light, who had chosen love over obligation, truth over pretense, and in doing so, had discovered that the greatest wealth wasn't measured in money or power but in moments exactly like this one. The nurse who kept receiving anonymous notes had never imagined that the coldest and strictest man in the hospital would become the warmest presence in her life. But love, Natalie had learned, didn't follow predictable paths. It found you in the places you least expected, with the people you never imagined, and when it was real, truly real, it was worth fighting for with everything you had. Their story had begun with words on paper, secret confessions written in the shadows. But it would continue in the light, spoken aloud every day in 1,000 small ways. In morning coffee shared before rounds. In late-night conversations about patience and dreams. In the simple act of choosing each other, again and again, despite every obstacle the world placed between them. And that, Natalie thought as Julian's arms tightened around her, was the truest kind of love there was.